My dad left when I was 7, and honestly, it was probably for the best. My mom stepped up in ways that still amaze me to this day. She worked double shifts at the local diner while also cleaning offices at night, all to keep our little two-bedroom house and make sure I had everything I needed. Our house wasn't much to look at from the outside, a small ranch style with peeling paint and a front porch that creaked when you walked on it. But inside it was pure magic. Every room held a story. The living room where we'd have movie marathons on rainy weekends. The kitchen where my mom taught me to cook her famous spaghetti sauce. My bedroom where she'd read me stories until I fell asleep even when she was dead tired from working all day. When I graduated high school and got accepted to the state university 2 hours away, my mom cried happy tears. She was so proud, even though I knew she was dreading the empty house. College was tough financially, but between my part-time job, some scholarships, and my mom's savings, we made it work. Every holiday and summer break, I'd come rushing back to our little house, and it always felt like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes. After graduation, I got a decent job in the city and moved into a small apartment. But I visited home at least twice a month. That house would always be my real home, no matter where life took me. So when my mom called me on a random Tuesday afternoon sounding completely flustered, I knew something was seriously wrong. I asked her what was going on because she sounded upset. She told me she just had the strangest conversation with my aunt and was still trying to wrap her head around it. When I asked what my aunt wanted this time, my mom's response shocked me. Now, let me tell you about my aunt. She's my mom's younger sister, and she's always had this attitude that the world owes her something. She married well, lives in a big house across town, but somehow she's never satisfied with what she has. She's always complaining about something or trying to get people to do things for her. My mom explained that my aunt wanted us to switch houses. She couldn't believe it either. My aunt had just showed up and announced that she thought it would be fun to trade places. When I asked if she really wanted our house, my mom confirmed that my aunt was bored with her current place and thought our house had better character. My aunt had told her she was tired of her neighborhood and wanted a change of scenery. I sat there in stunned silence. Our house had character all right, but it was also half the size of hers, and definitely not as fancy. But that wasn't even the point. This was our home, our sanctuary, our place. My mom told me she had said absolutely not to my aunt, but as she pointed out, we both knew how my aunt could be. When my aunt wanted something, she didn't give up easily. She had this way of wearing people down until they just gave in to make her stop. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost dropped my phone when I saw who it was from and what it said. The text said my aunt had heard from my mom about the house situation and had a better idea. She wanted me to pay her bills for a year and she would let us both live with her. She called this generous. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Pay her bills, to live in her house, while she got to live in ours for free. The sheer audacity of it made my head spin. I called my mom immediately and asked if she had seen the text from her sister. My mom asked what text, and then groaned when I told her what it said. She was ready to call my aunt right away, but I told her to let me handle it. I was done with her games. I took a deep breath and called my aunt directly. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. She seemed excited that I got her message and said she knew I'd see what a great deal this was. When I asked what exactly made this a great deal, since she wanted me to pay her bills and she wanted our house, she acted like I was missing something obvious. She told me I would get to live in her beautiful big house that was worth so much more than that little place I grew up in. I explained to her that our little place was our home and we weren't interested in switching houses or paying anyone's bills. We were perfectly happy where we were. She told me not to be so stubborn and said this could be good for all of us. She needed a change, and we could use an upgrade according to her. I told her we didn't need an upgrade. We needed her to respect our decision and drop this whole idea. She said fine, but insisted we were making a mistake because she was being very generous. Then she hung up, but I knew this wasn't over. My aunt never gave up that easily. Over the next few weeks, the phone calls and text messages became relentless. She called my mom every other day with new arguments about why we should switch houses. She tried guilt trips about family helping family. She offered to pay for the move-in expenses. She even suggested we could trade houses for just 6 months as a trial run. My mom was getting worn down by it all, so I decided to drive home for the weekend to deal with this mess in person. When I walked into our kitchen, my mom looked exhausted. She told me my aunt had called again that morning and threatened to tell the whole family that we were being selfish and unreasonable if we didn't agree to the house swap. I told my mom to let her try it because anyone who knew us would see right through that. But even as I said it, I knew my aunt could make life difficult for us. She had a way of twisting stories to make herself look like the victim. That evening, my aunt showed up at our front door unannounced. She walked right in like she owned the place, looking around our living room like she was already planning where to put her furniture. She announced that she had been thinking about this house swap and had decided to make one final offer. I told her there was nothing to decide because we had already said no multiple times. She insisted I hear her out and then said she would pay us $500 to switch houses with her. My mom and I just stared at her. $500 to give up our family home? My mom told her that wasn't even close to reasonable and that it wasn't about money anyway. My aunt scoffed and said everything was about money and we shouldn't pretend we were too good for it. I agreed with her that everything was about money, which was exactly why we were keeping our house that we owned outright instead of taking on her mortgage payments. That's when she finally lost it completely. She said she couldn't believe how selfish we both were and kept saying she was family and we should want to help her. I asked her to help her do what exactly? Take our house and pay her bills? I wanted to know how that was supposed to help her. She exploded and said she deserved better than what she had. She had been stuck in the same place for years while we got to live in this charming little house with all its character. I told her to get a different house then. Buy one, rent one, but stop trying to take ours. She insisted I didn't understand what it was like to want something different. My mom said she understood perfectly, but wanting something didn't mean you got to take it from someone else. My aunt stood there fuming for a moment, then grabbed her purse and headed for the door. She told us not to expect her to include us in any family events anymore because we had made our choice. I told her that if that was the price of keeping our home, then I guess we would pay it. She slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. The next morning I got a call from my grandmother asking what was going on between us and my aunt. My aunt had called her crying about how we were being mean to her and refusing to help her when she needed us most. I explained the real situation to my grandmother, who just sighed and said she would talk to my aunt. It turned out my grandmother had quite the conversation with my aunt about respecting other people's property and the difference between asking for help and making demands. My aunt didn't appreciate the lecture, but it worked. The phone call stopped, the text messages stopped, and when we saw her at family gatherings after that, she acted like the whole thing had never happened. 3 months later, I heard through my grandmother that my aunt had decided to renovate her own house instead. She hired a contractor to add character to her place rather than trying to steal the character from ours. My mom and I still live in our same little house with a creaky porch and the peeling paint. I had just started my new job as a teacher's aide at this fancy private school. You know the type, marble floors, uniforms that cost more than my rent, and parents who drive cars worth more than most people's houses. I was fresh out of college, broke as a joke, and desperately needed this job to pay off my student loans. My mom had connections through her church group and somehow managed to get me this position even though I had zero experience working with kids. The pay was decent and I figured how hard could it be, right? Help some privileged kids with their homework, make copies, maybe organize some supplies. Easy money. They paired me up with this teacher who I'm just going to call Karen because, well, you'll see why. Karen had been at this school for 15 years and acted like she owned the place. She was one of those people who believed the world owed her everything just for existing. The other staff members would roll their eyes whenever her name came up, but nobody wanted to cross her because she had some kind of weird influence with the administration. My first week was rough. Karen would dump all her grunt work on me while she sat at her desk browsing social media. She'd make me grade papers, set up her classroom, and even fetch her coffee from the teacher's lounge. When I tried to suggest maybe I could help with actual teaching stuff, She gave me this look like I'd just suggested we burn the school down. Karen told me I was there to assist her, not question how she ran her classroom. She said I should stick to what I know, which apparently was nothing according to her. The breaking point came during my third week. There was this student in our class who I'll call the smart kid. This boy was incredibly bright, probably the smartest kid I'd ever met. He'd finish his work in half the time it took other students, always had his hand up with thoughtful questions, and his test scores were off the charts. But for some reason, Karen absolutely despised him. I noticed it right away. She'd ignore his raised hand, give him extra assignments for no reason, and make snide comments about his work. The kid never complained or fought back, just kept his head down and continued excelling. It was honestly heartbreaking to watch. Then came the day everything exploded. We'd just gotten back test results from a major exam, and once again the smart kid had scored the highest in the class. A perfect score, actually. Karen was furious. Karen accused the smart kid of cheating, saying there was no way he got 100% legitimately. The kid told her he had studied really hard and offered to show his notes. Karen didn't believe him and said she saw him looking around during the test. The smart kid insisted he wasn't cheating and would never do that. The whole classroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Karen was turning red, and I could see she was about to lose it completely. Karen told the kid she'd been teaching for 15 years and knew a cheater when she saw one. She called him a little fraud, who thought he was so smart. The smart kid quietly repeated that he was telling the truth and hadn't cheated. That's when things got really crazy. Karen suddenly raised her hand like she was going to slap this kid right across the face. But this kid had amazing reflexes and caught her wrist before she could make contact. The other students gasped, and I think my jaw hit the floor. The smart kid just held her wrist for a second, then let go and stepped back. He didn't say anything, didn't get aggressive, just protected himself. But Karen went absolutely ballistic. Karen screamed about how dare he put his hands on her, calling it assault. Before anyone could say anything, she grabbed the kid by his arm and started dragging him toward the door, announcing they were going to the principal's office right away. I followed them because honestly, I was worried about what else Karen might do. The walk down the hallway was tense as hell. Other teachers were peeking out of their classrooms to see what the commotion was about. When we burst into the principal's office, his face went white as a sheet. You could tell he wasn't expecting this kind of drama. Karen immediately launched into her story, telling the principal that the student had physically attacked her when she confronted him about cheating on his exam. She claimed he grabbed her wrist and twisted it when she tried to discipline him for cheating. The principal looked at the smart kid, who was standing there, then back at Karen. He asked what exactly had happened. The smart kid explained that Karen had tried to hit him, and he just blocked it. The principal told the kid to wait outside, then had a hushed conversation with Karen. I couldn't hear everything, but Karen kept getting louder and louder. Karen kept insisting she didn't care who his father was and wouldn't tolerate this behavior in her classroom. That was weird. Why would she bring up his father? The principal looked really uncomfortable and kept trying to calm her down. Finally, Karen stormed out in a huff, leaving the principal looking like he'd just survived a hurricane. The principal went outside to talk to the smart kid privately. Their conversation was quiet, but I could see the principal was being really careful with his words, almost like he was trying to convince the kid not to tell someone about what happened. After a few minutes, they both came back in, and the principal sent the kid back to class. The rest of the day was awkward as hell. Karen acted like nothing happened, but the other students kept whispering among themselves. I spent the whole afternoon wondering what kind of school I'd gotten myself into. When the final bell rang, I was ready to get out of there. But when I was packing up my stuff, I noticed a smart kid waiting by the main entrance. A fancy black Mercedes with tinted windows pulled up, and a driver in a suit got out to open the door for him. That's when I realized this kid wasn't just some regular student. The car screamed money, serious money. But when the driver got closer, he noticed something on the kid's forehead. A small scratch from when Karen had grabbed him earlier. The driver immediately pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his voice sounded urgent. Within minutes, a black car rolled up and blocked the school entrance. 4 guys got out, and they looked like they meant business. Not the kind of guys you'd want to meet in a dark alley. The smart kid walked over to them and they huddled up, talking quietly. Then all five of them started walking toward the school building. That's when Karen appeared. She'd been staying late to grade papers, and when she saw the car blocking the entrance, she lost her mind. Karen walked up to the guys and angrily told them they couldn't park there because it was a school zone. One of the guys looked at the smart kid and asked if that was her. The kid just nodded. Without warning, one of the guys walked up to Karen and slapped her across the face. Hard. The sound echoed through the parking lot, and suddenly, everything went dead quiet. Karen's whole tough act crumbled instantly. She looked terrified. Then things escalated fast. The four guys surrounded Karen, and I swear I saw gun handles under their jackets. One of the guys told Karen she had two choices. She could leave the school right now and never come back, or they would handle things their way. Karen didn't need to be told twice. She practically ran to her car, leaving behind her purse, her dignity, and probably her career. Her hands were shaking so bad, she could barely get her keys in the ignition. The four guys walked into the school building, probably to have a chat with the principal. They came back out about 20 minutes later with the smart kid, got in their car, and drove away like nothing happened. Just like that, everything went back to normal. But nothing was really normal after that. The next day, Karen didn't show up to work, or the day after that. Word spread quickly that she'd decided to pursue other opportunities. Nobody asked questions, and nobody seemed surprised. The smart kid became completely untouchable. Students who used to pick on the quiet kids suddenly found other hobbies. Teachers who might have given him a hard time became incredibly polite and accommodating. Even the school bullies would step aside when he walked down the hallway. Me? I lasted exactly one more week before I turned in my resignation. I told them I gotten another job offer, but honestly, I just couldn't handle being around that kind of situation. The thought of accidentally crossing the wrong student and ending up like Karen was enough to send me running. I found work at a public school across town where the biggest drama is usually someone forgetting to bring lunch money. The pay is worse, but at least I don't have to worry about mysterious men in cars showing up to settle disputes. My grandmother had been the rock of our family for as long as I could remember. She lived in the same house for 40 years, right next door to some neighbors who moved in about 5 years ago. She was always polite to them, but she wasn't close with them at all. In fact, she used to complain to me regularly about how their kids would come over uninvited and help themselves to her water supply to fill up their above-ground pool. She even had to put locks on her outdoor faucets because they kept using both her hoses without asking. When my grandmother got diagnosed with cancer last year, she made the difficult decision not to pursue treatment. She had watched my grandfather go through months of chemotherapy and radiation, and he was absolutely miserable the entire time. She told us she didn't want to spend her remaining time feeling sick from treatments that might not even work. Our whole family respected her choice, even though it was heartbreaking. Over the next 12 months, my grandmother started giving away her belongings to family members and close friends. She would tell us to put our names on things we wanted, or she would specifically assign certain items to people. There were some family heirlooms that had clear destinations. My great-grandmother's china set was meant for my aunt and her children, and my grandfather's watch collection was designated for my father and eventually my brother and me. Everyone in the family knew about these arrangements, and there were never any arguments or disputes about who should get what. When my grandmother passed away, my father inherited the house. We were all devastated, but we were trying to process our grief and figure out the next steps. Then, completely out of nowhere, my father had a massive heart attack and died just 2 weeks later. I'm still not sure how I managed to function during that time. Losing both of them so close together felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Since my father hadn't updated his will after inheriting the house, it came to me as his only child. That's when the neighbor showed up. Let's call him Todd because that's the kind of name that fits someone this entitled. I was barely keeping it together, trying to sort through decades of belongings while dealing with lawyers and funeral arrangements when Todd knocked on my door. Todd came over looking really upset and told me he was angry that his family wasn't invited to my grandmother's funeral. I explained to him that we didn't actually have a funeral because we had been too busy dealing with my father's sudden death just 2 weeks earlier. Then he said something that really caught me off guard. He thought he should have been given a copy of the will because his kids loved my grandmother like she was their own family. I stared at him for a moment, wondering if he was serious. The will only mentioned actual family members, and my grandmother had never once spoken fondly of his children. In fact, she used to get annoyed when they would come over and call her grandma without permission. I told him the will only included family members, and I wasn't sure why he would expect to receive a copy. Todd insisted that my grandmother loved his kids like her own grandchildren, and said they should have been included when everything was divided up. Then he asked if I would let them go through the house to pick out some things to remember her by. My grandmother had died a month ago, my father had died 2 weeks ago, and this guy was asking if his kids could come rifle through her belongings like it was a garage sale. I told him I couldn't let anyone go through the house right now, but offered to let his children look through some boxes of items I was planning to donate to charity. Todd's face turned red, and I could tell he was getting angry. He said my offer was insulting and told me his daughter and son had their hearts set on some of the family heirlooms. He said they deserved to have something meaningful, not just leftover donation items. I actually laughed out loud at that point. I told him those family heirlooms were staying with the actual family, and that my brother had already taken a few pieces that were designated for him. Todd got even more upset and said it wasn't fair because his kids were her family too. He claimed she would have wanted them to have those heirlooms and insisted they should have been included with everyone else when everything was divided up. I reminded him that his kids were never at any family gatherings and pointed out that the only time my grandmother ever mentioned them was when she was complaining about them using her water without permission or calling her grandma when they weren't related to her. Todd argued back, saying she loved having them around and that they brought joy to her life. I had to set the record straight and told him she literally put locks on her outdoor faucets because his kids kept stealing her water for their pool, and that she complained about them constantly. Todd kept pushing, saying I was being unreasonable and that these were just material possessions, while his children had emotional attachments to them. Then he had the nerve to tell me that my grandmother would be rolling over in her grave if she knew how selfish I was being. At that point, I was done being polite. This man was standing in my doorway 2 weeks after my father's funeral, demanding that his children be given my family's heirlooms because he thought his kids were entitled to them. I told him very clearly that his children were never part of our family and that my grandmother only tolerated them as neighbors. I explained that she had specifically designated where her heirlooms would go, and none of them were meant for his family. I said the fact that he thought he had any claim to her belongings was honestly shocking to me. Todd wasn't done yet. He told me this wasn't over and claimed he knew she had promised his daughter her jewelry box, and his son was supposed to get some of my grandfather's tools. I told him that was absolutely not true and said I thought he knew that. I made it clear that my grandmother never promised his children anything, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into giving away family heirlooms based on lies. After that, I closed the door. But Todd kept coming back over the next few weeks with different demands. He wanted to know if his kids could at least get some photographs of my grandmother, or maybe some of her books, or perhaps some kitchen items since his daughter supposedly loved baking with her. That was another complete lie since my grandmother rarely baked and certainly never invited the neighbor kids over to help. The whole situation was making my grief process even more difficult than it already was. I was trying to sort through a lifetime of memories and belongings while this entitled neighbor kept harassing me about giving his children things that never belonged to them in the first place. Finally, about 3 months after my father's death, I found out that Todd's house was in foreclosure. Apparently, he had been behind on payments for months and the bank was repossessing the property. Within a year, he and his family had moved away completely. I never saw him again after that, but I heard from other neighbors that he tried the same entitled behavior with other people in the neighborhood. Apparently, when the elderly woman across the street passed away, Todd showed up at her family's door claiming that his kids deserved some of her belongings too because they had been like grandchildren to her as well.